The day Evelyn Sullivan rode into Harlan Creek, Texas, the summer of 1874, she arrived on a horse that was not hers, with a saddlebag that held everything she owned, and not a single soul in town knew her name. But they all felt the dust she kicked up on her way through, and not one of them forgot it. She had not sat still in 4 years. Not truly. Not in the way that meant peace, the kind where you sink into a chair and feel the weight of the world leave your bones and you think, yes, this is mine, this place, this moment, this quiet. 4 years of moving had stripped that possibility from her so thoroughly that she had almost forgotten what stillness felt like, almost convinced herself she did not need it. It had started in the spring of 1870 in San Antonio, when her husband Gerald Sullivan had died of a fever that took him in 3 days flat, leaving her with a mortgaged homestead, a mule too old to plow, and debts she had known nothing about. The land had been sold out from under her before the earth had even settled over Gerald's grave, and the men who came to collect had not been unkind, not exactly, but they had not been kind either. They had been businessmen, and that was almost worse. She had been 24 years old, and suddenly nothing belonged to her. So she moved. First to her cousin Martha's place outside of Austin, then west when Martha's husband made it clear that an extra mouth was one too many. She had worked as a cook in a trail camp for 6 months, then as a seamstress in a dry goods store in a place called Mesquite Flats that had dried up as quickly as its name suggested. She had driven a wagon for a medicine man who turned out to be a fraud, and she had left him in the middle of New Mexico territory with his bottles of colored water, when she found out what he was charging desperate people for false hope. She had been a laundress in El Paso for 8 months, the longest she had stayed anywhere, and she had been almost comfortable there. Almost. But the man who owned the laundry had started looking at her with eyes she recognized as trouble, and she had packed her single saddlebag and ridden out on the back of a borrowed horse belonging to a widow named Clara Reyes, who said she did not need it anymore, and pressed a $20 gold piece into Evelyn's hand without explanation and said, "Go somewhere that wants you, girl. Stop landing in places that only need you." Clara Reyes was the wisest woman Evelyn had ever met, and she had met her for exactly one afternoon. So she had ridden north and east because north and east was where she had not yet been, and the horse had walked on for 2 days before Harlan Creek appeared in the valley below her like a promise someone had half kept. It was not much to look at. A main street with perhaps 12 buildings on it, a church with a crooked steeple, a livery stable at one end and a hotel at the other. There was a saloon, naturally. There was a feed store and a general goods, and what looked like a sheriff's office with a lantern burning low in the window, even though it was barely past noon. What Harlan Creek had that other places did not was a creek. An actual one, wide and clear and cold even in the July heat, cutting through the valley like a gift from God that nobody had asked for but everybody needed. Evelyn had stopped her horse at the edge of it and let him drink while she pressed her wrists into the current and felt the cold travel up her arms and into her chest, and she thought, just for a moment, that maybe Clara Reyes had been right. Maybe places could want you. She did not know yet if this one did. She found out within an hour. The woman who ran the hotel, a compact and serious woman named Dora Hensley, who appeared to be about 60 years old and possessed of the kind of authority that comes not from size but from absolute certainty, had looked Evelyn up and down with the methodical assessment of someone valuing a horse. "You look like someone who can work," Dora said. She did not phrase it as a question. "I can," Evelyn said. "I need a woman who can cook breakfast and keep the rooms clean and deal with difficult men without flinching." "I have done all 3, Evelyn said. Dora had nodded once, the way a judge delivers a verdict. "Room and board and 50 cents a day. You start tomorrow." That had been how Evelyn Sullivan came to Harlan Creek, and it had been, in its small and unsentimental way, the first time in 4 years that someone had offered her something that felt like it might last. She did not know about the man on the hill yet. Wallace Walker had lived on the rise above town for 6 years, and in that time, He had become the kind of man that everyone in Harlan Creek knew, but not everyone could say they truly understood. He was 31 years old in the summer of 1874, broad in the shoulders and spare everywhere else, with hands that were permanently roughened by work, and a jaw that suggested stubbornness even in repose. He had dark hair that he cut himself, with mixed results, and eyes that were a particular shade of gray that looked different depending on the weather, which was either poetic or inconvenient depending on who was describing them. He had come to Harlan Creek in 1868 with $400, a horse named Coleman, and a plan that most people thought was foolhardy, and which he had executed with the quiet, steady patience of a man who did not much care what other people thought. He had bought 40 acres on the rise above the creek, built a house with lumber he had milled himself from timber on the land, cleared the east field for a kitchen garden, and established a small but thriving operation raising quarter horses that the ranches and the army outpost 20 miles north found useful. He was not wealthy. He was not poor. He was what the frontier occasionally produced if a man was willing to work hard enough and smart enough and did not have too much bad luck in a row. He was stable. He was rooted. He owned his land free and clear, had paid off the last of his debts in 1872, and the house on the rise above Harlan Creek was his in a way that very few things in the territory belonged wholly and certainly to the people who called them home. He went to town twice a week, on Tuesdays and Fridays, to pick up supplies and to sell horses when he had them ready. He ate supper occasionally at the hotel dining room because Dora Hensley kept a good kitchen, and he played cards at the saloon on Friday nights without gambling more than he could afford to lose, which was how he had remained solvent while men who sat at the same table had not. He was, by his own assessment, a man in good working order with a life he had built carefully and kept carefully, and expected to continue keeping carefully for as long as God or the territory allowed. He was, by the assessment of most women in Harlan Creek and in the surrounding county, a man who had been single for long enough that it had become a kind of fact about him, like the color of his hair or the particular way he walked, deliberate and unhurried, as though he had decided long ago that rushing was mostly a waste of effort. He had been engaged once briefly to a woman in Abilene named Frances who had ultimately chosen a man with a house already in town over a man with a plan to build one on a hill outside of one. He did not blame Frances. He had understood the logic, but the experience had left him cautious in the particular way that one near miss leaves a man cautious, not broken, not bitter, just more careful about where he placed his faith. He had not placed it anywhere in particular since then. He was not looking for anyone the Tuesday morning that he drove his wagon into Harlan Creek and saw a woman with auburn hair and a jaw set like iron, directing two men who were attempting to bring a heavy trunk up the hotel stairs, telling them in a voice that carried clear to the other side of the street that if they tilted it that way they were going to lose the whole thing, and they needed to get their hands under the base and push rather than pull. The men with the trunk did as she said, and the trunk went up the stairs without incident. Wallace sat in his wagon on the street and watched this happen, and then he continued watching as the woman dusted her hands on her apron and looked up at the morning sky with an expression of brief and private satisfaction before turning to go back inside. She had not looked at him. She had not looked at anyone on the street. She had solved the problem of the trunk and gone back to whatever was next, and there was something in that economy of attention, that complete and self-contained purpose, that stayed with him the entire rest of the day without his permission. He had asked Hector at the General Goods who the new woman at the hotel was, and Hector had told him her name was Evelyn Sullivan, widow, arrived last week from El Paso way, seemed capable and did not smile much, but when she did it was worth waiting for. And that last part was Hector's editorial, not strictly relevant, but it lodged in Wallace's mind the same way the trunk scene had. He went home that evening and sat on his porch in the one wooden chair he had put there 3 years ago when he built the porch. And he looked at the valley below, and the lights of Harlan Creek just coming on in the dusk. And he thought about the space beside that chair, the empty expanse of porch boards he had never done anything with. And then he thought about Evelyn Sullivan with her hands on her hips directing men with a trunk. And then he made himself stop thinking about it, because that was not the kind of thinking a sensible man encouraged after meeting someone once without even meeting them. The second time he saw her was Friday, which was 2 days later, which was not very long. He had come in for his regular Friday trip and had ended up at the hotel dining room for supper because the ride had been long and his own cooking was functional but not inspiring. She was the one who brought his food. She set the plate down in front of him with the same efficient attention she had given the trunk, and she asked if he needed anything else, and he said he did not. And she nodded and turned to go, and he said, "Evelyn Sullivan," before he could think the better of it. She stopped and turned back with the kind of wariness in her eyes that a woman who has moved alone through the frontier for 4 years earns through experience, not assumption. It was not hostility. It was a question. "I apologize," Wallace said. "I heard your name from Hector Vasquez at the General Goods. I am Wallace Walker. I have a horse operation on the rise above town. I wanted to introduce myself properly since I expect I will be eating your cooking for some time." The wariness did not entirely leave her eyes, but it shifted slightly into something more assessing, which he felt was a fair response to a stranger knowing your name. "Mr. Walker," she said. "Ma'am." "Do you need anything else with your supper?" "No, ma'am, it looks very good, thank you." She went back to the kitchen. He ate his supper, which was very good. A beef and potato stew with cornbread that had a crisp edge he appreciated. When she came by to take his plate, he said, "That was excellent, the cornbread particularly." She looked at him for a moment as though evaluating whether this was a genuine opinion or a preamble to something else. He held her gaze steadily, because he meant it and he thought it was important that she know he meant it. "Thank you," she said, and this time there was something real in it, not wariness and not performance. Just genuine acknowledgement. He rode home in the dark satisfied with how the evening had gone, which was, he knew, not a great deal to be satisfied about. But he was a man who valued precision, and he thought the beginning of anything was important to get right. Over the next several weeks, he came to understand something about Evelyn Sullivan that the rest of Harlan Creek was still in the process of learning. She was remarkable. Not in the way that word was usually used carelessly, but in the original, precise sense of it, meaning she was worth remarking upon, worth noticing, worth attention. She worked from before dawn until after dark every day of the week except Sunday. She cooked 3 meals a day for the hotel guests, and for the townspeople who came to the dining room, and she did it with a consistency and quality that had people coming from neighboring spreads on Sundays, when Dora let her make a proper dinner with as many courses as the available ingredients allowed. She had found a source of fresh vegetables from a farm family 5 miles east named the Albrechts, and she had negotiated directly with the ranchers for better quality beef cuts. And within 6 weeks, the hotel dining room had a reputation that extended to Fort Braedon, 20 miles north, which meant that occasionally officers came to eat and occasionally left large tips that went directly to Evelyn, because Dora Hensley was a woman who believed in giving credit where it was owed. She also fixed things. It was not in her job description, but she seemed constitutionally unable to pass a problem without addressing it. She had repaired the loose step on the hotel stair that had been loose for 2 years. She had told Dora that the chimney in the back bedroom needed cleaning or someone was going to have a fire, and Dora had inspected it and found that Evelyn was right. She had organized the supply room with a logic so clear that Dora had actually wept slightly from relief, which she would later claim was dust in her eye, but nobody believed her. She was in constant motion. Not anxious motion, not the nervous energy of someone who cannot bear to be still. Or rather, it was that, but it was more than that too. It was as though she had made an agreement with herself at some point that stillness was not available to her, and she had honored the agreement so faithfully, and for so long that she had forgotten it was ever made. She moved through each day like someone completing a sentence she had started years ago and could not yet find the ending for. Wallace noticed all of this because he was in town more often than twice a week now. He was not proud of this fact. He told himself and Coleman and no one else that he had business to attend to, and it was true. There was always business to attend to, but the particular timing of when he attended to it had shifted in ways that required a honesty he was only beginning to be able to afford. He began to talk with her properly in early September, when he had come to the dining room for supper, and found that she was the only one there, Dora having gone to visit her sister in Laredo for a week, and the two hotel guests having checked out that morning. Evelyn had made a full supper anyway because she had already started it, and she was not a woman who left things half done, and she sat down at the table across from him because Dora was not there to suggest propriety, and because she had been on her feet since 4 in the morning and she was, for once, tired enough to permit herself to stop. She had said, looking at the table, "I am not usually this still." And he had said, "I know." She had looked up at him then, and there was something startled in it, as though she had not expected to be known at all. "You have noticed," she said. It was not a question. "You are difficult not to notice," he said, and then, because he did not want that to sound the wrong way, he added, "I mean only that you move through town like you have an agenda. It is not a criticism. I admire it." She had looked at him for a long moment. "Where do you live?" she asked. "On the rise above town. I can see the hotel from my porch." "On a clear day, can you see the creek?" "On a clear day, I can see everything from up there." She had gone quiet for a moment, and he thought he saw something cross her face that might have been longing, though he could not be certain. "I have not been up to higher ground since I arrived," she said. "I have not had time." "You could come and see the view sometime," he said, "if you ever had time." She had looked at him with that assessing look that he was beginning to understand was not suspicion so much as thoroughness. She looked at everything thoroughly, including, apparently, him. "Are you a safe man, Mr. Walker?" she asked. He was not offended by the question. He understood precisely why it was being asked and by whom and from what experience it was arising. "I am," he said. "Dora Hensley will tell you so. Hector Vasquez will tell you so. Sheriff Beaumont will tell you so if you want to ask him." "I have already asked them," she said. He blinked. "You have." "When I first arrived, I make it a practice." She said it without apology and without self-consciousness, simply as information. "That is very sensible," he said. "I have found it necessary," she said quietly, and there was 4 years of frontier in those 5 words. He nodded because there was nothing useful he could say to that she did not already know. They talked for 2 hours over that empty dining room, and he learned things about her in pieces, the way you learn a landscape from a distance, the shape of it first, then the details as you get closer. She had grown up in Georgia. Her father had been a school teacher, and her mother had run a small millinery shop, and she had been educated enough to read and write well and do sums quickly, which she said was an advantage in keeping a supply room. She had come west with Gerald in 1868 because he had believed in the territory with the particular fervor of men who had read too many pamphlets, and she had believed in him, which she said now was not the same as believing in the territory, but had felt the same at the time. She spoke of Gerald without bitterness, but without sentiment either. He had been a man who meant well and planned poorly, and she missed him in the simple, honest way you miss someone who was kind to you even if they did not manage to be reliable. He told her about Francis without really meaning to, and then was glad he had. She listened without performing sympathy, just received the information and said she made a reasonable decision, which was exactly what he himself had always thought and which he had never heard anyone else say without it feeling like a consolation. "She did," he agreed. "Do you mind that she did?" "Not anymore," he said. "I minded it for about a year. Now I think it probably worked out as it was meant to." She looked at him steadily. That is a very peaceful thing to think. I am generally a peaceful man. Something in her eyes shifted slightly, as though she was filing this information away in a category labeled possibly true and worth watching. He did not push for more than that. He had learned, in 31 years of being himself, that patience was not passivity. It was confidence in the timing of things. He rode home that night and sat on his porch for a long time before going in. The sky was immense the way it only is in Texas, so full of stars it seemed almost impractical, and the lights of Harlan Creek below were small and warm in the darkness. He thought about Evelyn Sullivan sitting down for the first time in what felt like weeks, and the way she had looked at that table with an expression like someone touching something they had not expected to be able to touch. He thought about his porch, about the single chair, which was a good chair, made from oak, with solid arms and a back that had just enough angle to let you sit for an hour without your spine complaining. He thought about the empty space beside it, the boards that had been bare for 3 years. He thought about a woman who did not sit down, and a view that was worth sitting down for. He went inside and got his tools and came back out and sat on the porch step and began to draw in his head the design of a second chair. Not the same as the first. Different. He was not sure yet exactly how, but a chair that would fit a woman who had forgotten how to sit, made in a way that made sitting feel less like stopping and more like choosing. He did not tell anyone he was doing this. Not because he was ashamed of it, but because the doing of it was private in the way that hope is private before it has any right to be called hope. He started building it in October, on the evenings when the horsework was done, and the autumn light lasted long enough. He built it from cedar he had cut from the west end of his property, wood that had a warm reddish tone to it, and a smell that was clean and sharp and good. The chair was lower than his oak one, with arms that curved outward slightly so that you could rest in it without feeling contained, and the back was shaped at a gentler angle, the kind that allows you to look up at the sky without tipping your head back too far. He carved a small detail into each arm, nothing elaborate, a simple edge that his hand had added without his mind directing it, the way things sometimes come out of you when you are making something for someone else. He set it beside his chair on the porch and looked at them together in the early November light, and thought that they looked right there, the two chairs facing the valley, facing the creek below and the town below that, and the great pale blue distance beyond. He did not tell her. He did not know how to tell her without it sounding like a declaration he was not sure she was ready to receive. He did not know if she would come up to the rise at all, and if she did, whether she would understand the chair as what it was, which was not a gift exactly but an invitation, the physical form of a thought he had been thinking since September, which was that there existed a place in the world where Evelyn Sullivan might rest and find it worthy of her. In the meantime, he came to town. He talked with her. He brought her a book from the traveling merchant who came through in October, a collection of nature essays she had mentioned once in passing as something she had read and liked, and he left it with Dora to give to her with no note attached, because he was not ready to sign his name to it yet. Dora gave it to Evelyn and said Wallace Walker had thought she might like it, and Evelyn had apparently held it for a long moment and then said, "That was kind of him," in a voice that Dora described to her sister in Laredo as not sounding much like someone just receiving a book. He did not know Dora had reported this. If he had, he would have felt the same cautious, careful hope that he was already feeling, only with more evidence. October moved into November, and November brought the particular cold of the Texas hill country winter, which was not the savage cold of the northern plains but had its own bite to it. Frost on the grass in the mornings and sky the color of pale iron by afternoon. Harlan Creek became quieter, the way small towns do in winter when the cattle drives are done and the travelers move less. The hotel was quieter too, and Evelyn found herself with evenings that were not full of dinner service, evenings that presented themselves as empty in the way she had not experienced in 4 years. She did not know what to do with them at first. She cleaned things that did not need cleaning. She reorganized the supply room, which she had already organized to perfection, and found to her mild frustration that she could not improve upon it. She mended her dresses. She read the book Wallace Walker had sent her, and she read it slowly, which was unusual for her, because she found that she did not want it to end. On a Thursday evening in the second week of November, she put on her coat and walked up the rise above town. She told herself she was going for the air. She told herself she was going for the view. She had been telling herself things for 4 years as a way of managing her own interior life, and she was good at it, so she almost believed herself, right up until the moment she saw the 2 chairs on the porch and stopped walking. She stood at the edge of the property and looked at them. 2 chairs. One oak, one cedar, set at the slight angle that meant they faced the same direction, which was west and south, which was the direction of the valley and the creek, and the sky going orange in the late afternoon. She looked at them for a long time. Wallace was in the barn finishing the evening feeding when he heard someone on the porch. He came out slowly, not startled, because he had heard the sound of someone coming up the path. He had good ears from years of living alone on a rise where sounds traveled oddly, and he looked out and saw Evelyn Sullivan standing at the edge of his porch, looking at the 2 chairs. He stood in the barn doorway for a moment. He did not speak immediately. He gave her the time she was taking because it seemed important not to interrupt whatever she was working out. Then she turned and saw him. She did not jump. She looked at him with that steady, thorough look and said, "You built 2 chairs." "I did," he said. "When did you build the second one?" "October," he said. A silence that was not uncomfortable moved between them. The evening wind came up from the valley and moved her hair across her cheek, and she did not brush it away. "Did you build it for anyone in particular?" she asked. He looked at her. He had decided in the private architecture of his own thinking that he would be honest with her when the moment asked for it. "Yes," he said. "Were you going to tell me?" "Eventually," he said. "When the time was right." She looked at the chairs again. She looked at the view, the valley going gold below them, the creek catching the last of the light like a thread of silver through the grass. She looked at it for so long that he thought she might be counting the years it had been since she had stood still and looked at anything. Then she walked up onto the porch and sat down in the cedar chair. He watched her sit in it. He watched the moment that happened, which was not a large moment from the outside, just a woman sitting down in a chair on a porch, but which was, from the inside, something considerably larger than that. He saw her back settle against the cedar. He saw her hands rest on the curved arms. He saw her take a breath that was different from working breath, different from moving breath, a breath that had nothing to do with the next task. He walked up onto the porch and sat in his own chair beside her, and they both looked at the valley as the sun went down. "This is a very good chair," she said after a while. "I am glad," he said. "You made it at an angle that makes it easy to see the sky." "I thought about the view when I built it," he said. She turned her head and looked at him. He met her eyes, and they looked at each other in the direct, honest way of 2 people who have been telling themselves stories and are now quietly in the middle of stopping. "Wallace," she said. She used his given name for the first time, and it sat differently in the air than his surname had. "Evelyn," he said. "I have not sat still in 4 years," she said. "Not like this, not for something that was not tiredness." "I know," he said. "Why did you build this without telling me?" He thought about how to answer that truthfully. "Because I did not know yet if I had the right to," he said, "and because I wanted to build it correctly first and then see if you wanted it." "And now," she said, "do you think you have the right?" "I think I would very much like the right," he said carefully and with precision, "but that depends on you." She turned back to the view. He watched her profile against the darkening sky, the particular set of her jaw that he had been studying for 4 months without meaning to and now meant to. "I have not trusted very easily," she said, "for some time." "That is reasonable," he said. "It is not that I think you are untrustworthy," she said. "I have done my research." A small, private smile crossed her face, and he felt that smile in his chest in a way he had not felt anything in a long time. "I remember," he said. "It is that I have been moving for so long," she said, "that I am not entirely certain I know how to stop. What if I cannot do it? What if stillness is something you lose the ability for? He was quiet for a moment. Then he said, I built that chair for someone who might need to relearn it, not for someone who already knew how. There is no time limit on the chair. She closed her eyes briefly. When she opened them, the last of the sunset was going out of the sky and the first stars were showing, and she looked at them with an expression he could not fully read but which made him feel as though he was being trusted with something significant. Come down to supper tomorrow, she said. I will make something that is not what I usually make, something better. All right, he said. She stood up from the cedar chair and smoothed her coat and looked at the chair once more, memorizing it or acknowledging it or both. Good night, Wallace, she said. Good night, Evelyn, he said. He watched her walk down the path toward town until the darkness absorbed her, and then he sat back in his chair and looked at the stars and felt the kind of quiet that is not empty but full, the kind you only get when something has genuinely begun. She made him chicken with herbs and a cream sauce that required cream she had gotten from the Albrecht farm that morning, and a spiced apple tart she had been saving the apple recipe for without knowing for whom. He ate it with the attention of someone who understood they were being given something real, and when he was done he said, "That was extraordinary," with enough feeling that she looked at him sharply to see if he was performing, and finding that he was not, sat down across from him for the first time without the pretense of business. "Why horses?" she asked. "What made you come to Texas for horses specifically?" He told her about the quarter-horse business the way he rarely talked about it, with the genuine affection of a man explaining something he loves. The particular intelligence of a well-bred quarter-horse, the compact power of them, the way they could change direction at full speed with an almost supernatural responsiveness. He had grown up in Kentucky where horses were a culture and a language, and when he had come to Texas, he had seen immediately that the cattlemen and the cavalry and the freighters all needed horses, but the horses they needed were the fast, strong, sure-footed kind that came from good breeding, and most of the horses in the territory were merely adequate. She listened the way she did everything, with her full attention, which was something he found genuinely rare in people, and especially rare in people who had as much to think about as she did. She asked intelligent questions. She asked about the bloodlines, about the difference between what the cavalry wanted and what a cattleman wanted, about how he knew when a horse was ready to sell and when it needed more time. He answered each one and found that the conversation moved somewhere he had not expected, into a discussion of animal intelligence and temperament and the ethics of trading in creatures who had preferences and loyalties. "My horse," she said, "the one I rode in on, he is not mine. He belongs to a woman in El Paso named Clara Reyes who told me to take him." "Do you need to return him?" "She told me to keep him," Evelyn said, "but he is old, he is comfortable at the livery but he should not be worked anymore." "Bring him up to my pasture," Wallace said. "He can retire properly. There is good grass and he will have company." She looked at him. "You do not have to do that." "I am not doing it out of obligation," he said. "I am doing it because you clearly care about the horse and because an old horse deserves good grass." She looked at him for one long, level moment, and then she nodded. "Thank you," she said. The horse, whose name Evelyn had been calling Red Jack because of the deep roan color of him, was moved to Wallace's pasture the following week. He watched the horse walk into the field and lower his old head into the November grass and begin eating with the satisfied air of a creature who had been carrying too much for too long and finally set it down. Evelyn stood at the fence beside him watching, and he watched her face rather than the horse and saw something in it that looked like relief. "He looks happy," she said. "He looks right," Wallace said. She glanced at him sideways. He met her eyes briefly and looked away, because he did not want to push the thing that was growing between them by pressing it too hard. He was a careful man. He could wait. He did not have to wait as long as he thought. December came to the hill country with a cold rain that turned the creek silver and kept people indoors, and turned Harlan Creek's small population inward on itself in the comfortable winter way. There were 2 dances in December, one organized by the church and one organized by the saloon, which represented the full social spectrum of the town. Wallace went to the church dance because Dora Hensley had organized it, and he was genuinely fond of Dora, and also because he knew Evelyn would be there. She came in a blue dress he had not seen before, which she told him later she had made herself from fabric she had bought at Hector's store specifically for the occasion, which meant she had thought about the occasion and decided it warranted new fabric, and he stored that information with the particular care he gave to everything that suggested she was considering the future. He asked her to dance twice, which was the correct number, the number that conveyed meaning without being so insistent that it became pressure. The first dance was a reel and required no holding, just the passing and circling that was as much exercise as art, and he watched her dance with the grace of someone who had been taught properly and had not lost it, a controlled, happy ease that was different from her working motion, looser, more present. The second dance was slower, a waltz played badly but sincerely by old Pete Morrow on his fiddle, and when Wallace offered his hand and she took it and they moved together in the small cleared space between the pews, he was aware in every particular of the fact that she was close, that her hand was in his hand and his other hand was at her waist, and that she was looking at him directly while they danced rather than at the middle distance, which was what she did when she was being careful. And the fact that she was not being careful seemed to him the most significant thing that had happened in a year. "You dance well," she said. "Kentucky," he said. "They teach dancing in Kentucky. They teach everything in Kentucky that involves either horses or dancing," he said. "It is a state with priorities." She laughed. It was the first time he had made her laugh properly, and it was better than he had imagined, which was saying something, because he had imagined it once or twice. After the dance, they walked back to the hotel in the cold December night, and he stopped at the door, and they stood facing each other in the lamplight falling from the hotel window. "I want to be honest with you about something," he said. "All right," she said. "I have been considerably more interested in you since September than I have said outright," he said. "I have been careful about saying it because I wanted to give you time and because I respect your wariness and I think it is entirely justified. But I do not want to be so careful that you do not know what I mean." She looked at him steadily. "What do you mean, Wallace?" she said, and her voice was quiet and there was no armor in it at all. "I mean that I would like to court you," he said, "properly, with the intention of marrying you if you should ever want that. And if you do not want that, or not with me, I would rather know now than later." She was quiet for a long moment. A dog barked somewhere down the street and a cold wind came through and she wrapped her arms around herself but did not look away from him. "I have not been in one place long enough for anyone to want to court me," she said, "not since Gerald." "You are in one place now," he said. "I am not sure I know how to trust that," she said, "that it will last, that I will not need to move again." "Harlan Creek wants you," he said. "Dora wants you. The whole town eats your cooking and comes back for it. You have made this place better since you arrived, and it knows it." He paused. "And I want you for what that is worth." She looked at him for so long and so directly that he felt it all the way through him like a cold rinse of water, clarifying and precise. Then she said, "It is worth a great deal, Wallace Walker, more than you probably know." He breathed. "Does that mean yes?" "That means yes," she said. "Court me properly. I have high standards and I will not pretend otherwise." "I would be disappointed if you did," he said. She went inside and he walked back through the cold toward his horse feeling lighter than he had in years, which was not something he had expected from a night that had started with a church dance and Pete Morrow's fiddle. He courted her properly. He was a man of his word, and he took the word properly with full seriousness. He brought her flowers when flowers were available and books when they were not, and he took her riding on Sunday afternoons when she had the afternoon free, into the hills behind his property where the cedar and live oak made a world that was whole and private and beautiful in its winter austerity. He showed her the things about the land he loved, the particular way the light fell in the late afternoon, the cold spring that ran clear even in drought, the place on the East Ridge where you could look out over 100 miles of hill country and feel the size of things with your whole body. She brought food sometimes, packed in the careful, generous way of a woman who takes cooking seriously. They would eat sitting on a blanket on the ridge with the wind coming through their coats, and they would talk with the ease that had developed between them across months of carefully built trust, the ease that felt like coming home to a place you had not known you had been looking for. He told her about his family, his mother who had died in 1865, and his father who still lived in Lexington and wrote letters once a month that Wallace answered once a month with his own, accounting for the horses and the land and the weather, and omitting the loneliness because his father worried and was too far away to help. He told her about his brother Thomas, who had gone to San Francisco and found work in a shipping office and seemed to like the coast, and about his sister, Anne, who had married a minister in Louisville and had 3 children and appeared quietly content. She told him about Georgia, about the particular red clay of it and the smell of magnolia in June, about her father's schoolroom with its map of the world on one wall and her mother's hat shop with its incredible optimism of color. She told him that she had not written to her parents in 2 years because she had been ashamed of the constant moving, of having nothing settled to report, and he listened to this with the gravity it deserved. "Write to them," he said. "Tell them you are in Harlan Creek, Texas, and you are well, and that there is a creek here and good work and a view from a hill that is worth seeing." "What if they ask if I am settled?" she said. "Tell them you are becoming so," he said. She looked at him sideways with that look that was no longer fully wariness and not yet fully something else but was in the interesting country between them. "That is an answer with a future in it," she said. "I intend it to have a future in it," he said. She wrote the letter the following Sunday. She did not tell him what she wrote in it, and he did not ask. January of 1875 was cold and dry and brought with it a crisis that tested the fragile new peace of Harlan Creek in ways that winter crises tend to. A family named the Boyds, who ranched 15 miles north, had been in a dispute with a neighboring outfit called the Crane Operation over water rights to a shared creek tributary, and the dispute had been building through the fall and had now hardened into something that the sheriff, a sensible man named Dale Beaumont, was having difficulty containing. It touched Wallace's operation tangentially, because the Boyds had bought horses from him in the fall, and now came to him asking if he would speak on their behalf to Crane's foreman, a man named Jessup, on the basis that Jessup respected Wallace Walker's opinion in a way he did not respect the Boyds. It was the kind of request that placed a man in the middle of something he had not started and could not control, and Wallace had the sense to take it to Sheriff Beaumont first before doing anything. He brought Evelyn into the conversation not because he needed to, but because he found he wanted her perspective, and her perspective, as usual, was both useful and direct. "The Boyds are not wrong about the water rights," she said. "A tributary that runs through both properties belongs to both families under territorial law, but being right is not the same as winning if the other side is willing to be uglier about it." "What would you do?" he said. "I would not be the one to talk to Jessup directly," she said. "That makes you the advocate and puts you in the middle. I would ask Sheriff Beaumont to arrange a formal meeting with both parties and then offer to be a witness to whatever agreement they reach, so your name is attached to the resolution rather than the negotiation." It was better advice than what he had been considering. He did what she suggested, and when the meeting happened, the presence of both the sheriff and Wallace Walker as a respected neutral party had enough weight that Jessup and old Boyd shook hands and agreed to a water schedule that the sheriff wrote down and both men signed. It was not a perfect resolution, but it was a real one, and it held, and the trouble did not become worse. Afterward, walking back through Harlan Creek from the sheriff's office, Wallace said, "That was your strategy, not mine." "It was our conversation," she said. "It was better than what I had thought of," he said. "I want you to know I noticed that." She looked at him. "Most men would not say that," she said. "I am not interested in most men's approach," he said. She took his arm, which she had not done before. A simple, natural gesture, the kind that does not require explanation or announcement. He felt the weight of her hand in the crook of his arm and matched his pace to hers, and they walked back through the cold January street with the ease of people who have found their stride together. February arrived with a letter from his father in Lexington, expressing surprise and delight at the news that Wallace had included in his own letter, which was that he was courting a woman of strong character and good sense and remarkable cooking. And his father had written back that his mother would have liked to know this, and that he hoped to receive further news on the subject at the earliest opportunity. Wallace showed Evelyn the letter partly because he wanted to and partly because he thought it was important for her to know that his family was the kind that would welcome her. She read it carefully and then handed it back and said, "Your father sounds like a good man." "He is," Wallace said, "the best I have known." "Mine too," she said quietly. "I hope I have not hurt them by being so long silent." "Write them again," he said. "Tell them more this time." She did. And this time she told him a little of what she had written, which was that she was in Texas, in a place called Harlan Creek, and that she was working and stable and well, and that there was a man who had built her a chair on his porch and did not tell her it was hers until she came and sat in it, and that she thought that said something important about him that she was still in the process of understanding, but that she believed was worth understanding. He did not say anything when she told him this, but she saw something happen in his face that was not performed and not modulated, and was, in its directness, the most fully honest thing she had seen in him yet, which was considerable. He proposed to her on a Sunday in late February, on the porch, in the two chairs, which was where it seemed to him the conversation had always been moving toward. He had not rehearsed it. He found that he did not want to, that rehearsed words had a quality of performance that he did not want anywhere near something this real. He said simply that he loved her, and that he had been falling in love with her since September with the complete cooperation of every part of himself, and that he wanted to marry her and build something with her, not just the house that was already there but a life, and that he knew she had been moving for 4 years, and that he was not asking her to stop moving, only to move in one direction with him, and that he would do everything in his power to make sure she never had cause to regret it. She had been looking at the valley below as he talked, and when he finished she was quiet for a moment, and then she turned to him and her eyes were bright in a way he had not seen in her, which was not tears but something adjacent to them, the pressure of feeling too large for its container. "I have been in love with you since October," she said. "When I found out, you sent me the book. I did not know what to do with it because I had not been in one place long enough to love anyone, and I was afraid it would not hold, that I would not hold." "Has it held?" he said. "Yes," she said. "To my considerable surprise it has held." "Then marry me," he said. "Yes," she said. "Wallace Walker, yes." He reached across the arms of their two chairs and took her hand, and she turned her hand over and held his. And they sat there on the porch above Harlan Creek in the February cold, with the valley spread out below them going from silver to gold as the morning sun climbed the sky, and it was the most at rest either of them had been in a very long time. They were married in April, in the church with the crooked steeple, which someone had straightened over the winter. It had been Evelyn who had pointed out to the pastor that it was crooked, and the pastor had found 2 volunteers and a rope and fixed it in an afternoon. The church looked better for it, and the pastor thanked her at the wedding service in a way that made the whole congregation laugh. Dora Hensley cried openly, and made no attempt to attribute it to dust. Hector Vasquez sat in the front pew, and beamed with the satisfaction of a man who felt personally responsible for an outcome he had in fact contributed to only by answering an indirect question about a stranger's character several months earlier. Sheriff Beaumont was there with his wife Clara, and old Pete Morrow played the fiddle at the reception with considerably more skill than he had managed at the church dance, having apparently been motivated by the occasion to practice. The Albrecht family came down from their farm with a jar of preserved honey and a smoked ham, and the Boyds came from 15 miles north, and even Jessup from the crane operation came, which surprised everyone including Wallace. But Jessup shook Wallace's hand at the reception and said he had always liked a man who kept his word, and that he wished them well, and Wallace thanked him and meant it. Evelyn wore a white dress she had made herself over the course of March, working on it in the mornings before the cooking started, and she had embroidered a small border of wildflowers at the cuffs and hem, in a variety of thread colors she had gotten from Hector's store. When she walked down the aisle, she walked with the same deliberate, self-contained purpose she walked everywhere, and when she found Wallace's eyes at the front of the church, she did not look away. He said his vows without looking at the paper the pastor had given him, because he had memorized them, and also because he could not look away from her. She moved into the house on the rise above Harlan Creek that same day, her saddlebag and 3 boxes of her belongings carried up by Wallace in the wagon with Coleman pulling in his usual steady way. She stood in the house and looked at the solid construction of it, the good windows, the kitchen that was serviceable and would be better once she had organized it, the bedroom with its view of the valley, the parlor with its bookshelves and the fireplace going strong against the April cool. "It is a good house," she said. "It needs a woman who knows what she wants," he said. She turned and looked at him with a slow smile that she had been giving him more often in recent months, and which still did each time what the first one had done, which was to make the whole room feel warmer. "It has one," she said. She stayed. That was the thing, the simple, astonishing fact of it. She stayed. Not because she had no choice, not out of exhaustion or resignation or the practical mathematics of having nowhere else to go, but because she wanted to, because the rise above Harlan Creek had become in the months since September a place that held something she had not had since before Gerald died, which was the sense that she was rooted somewhere that was hers. She still moved. She was not a still woman by nature and never would be. She organized the house with the same thoroughness she had brought to the hotel supply room. She built a proper kitchen garden on the south side of the house, working with Wallace on the fence to keep the deer out, and in the summer of 1875 she grew tomatoes and peppers and beans and cucumbers in quantities that astonished even the Albrechts, who were farming people. She started a small flock of chickens. She renegotiated with Dora Hensley, who was heartbroken to lose her cook but too fond of her to be truly angry, and arranged to come down to the hotel 3 days a week to cook for the dining room on a consulting basis, because she enjoyed the cooking, and because a little independence in a marriage was something she valued, and which Wallace understood and supported without her having to explain it. But the evenings she sat in the cedar chair on the porch and looked at the valley, and Wallace sat in his oak chair beside her, and they were together in the particular companionable silence that is not the absence of communication but its highest form, 2 people so comfortable with each other's presence that words are optional. The summer of 1875 was full and good and moved at the pace of seasons that have been properly inhabited. Wallace sold 8 horses to the Fort Braedon Cavalry in July at a price that covered the entire year's operating costs with money left over for improvements, and Evelyn suggested that the improvements include proper shelving in the barn and a new roof on the chicken coop, both of which were urgently needed, and she was right on both counts. The house was improved too, incrementally, in the way that a house becomes a home when someone inhabits it with genuine attention, new curtains in the kitchen, a proper pantry she had Wallace build off the back of the kitchen, a bookshelf in the bedroom for the growing collection of volumes she had accumulated, and Wallace kept adding to. Evelyn received a letter from her parents in Georgia in August, her mother's handwriting first and then her father's on the second page, and she sat at the kitchen table reading it with her hand pressed flat over her heart as though keeping something from flying out of her chest. Her father had written that he was glad she had found a good man and a place that was worthy of her, and that her mother said to tell her that a woman who can cook and sew and keep accounts and handle difficult men was a woman worth her weight in gold in any century, and that they were proud of her and they wished her joy. She cried then, not the held-in way she had cried things before, but properly, the way you cry when grief that has been traveling beside you quietly for a long time finally finds a door and goes out. Wallace came in from the barn and found her at the table and sat down beside her and took her hand and did not say anything, because there was nothing useful to say, and because his presence was enough, had always been enough, was in fact the whole point. She told him what her father had written, and he listened with his full attention, and then he said, "They are right about you. You are partial," she said, wiping her eyes. "Absolutely," he said, "and still right." By autumn of 1875, Evelyn knew she was pregnant. She told Wallace on a Sunday evening on the porch in their chairs, as the sun went down over the valley. She had been sitting with the knowledge for 2 weeks, turning it over, examining it from every angle the way she did everything, making sure she understood it before she spoke it aloud. He looked at her for a long, still moment. His face went through something she watched with care, the initial surprise, the absorption of the information, and then something opening behind his eyes that was not just happiness but something larger, more fundamental, the particular illumination of a man confronting the future and finding it extraordinary. "Are you well?" he said. "Are you frightened?" "I am well," she said, "and yes, I am a little frightened. I do not think that is unusual." "It is not unusual," he said. "I am also a little frightened. I think that is probably correct." "You are frightened. The idea of being responsible for another person," he said, "a small one who will depend entirely on us. That is a significant thing, Evelyn." "Yes," she said, "it is." They sat with it together for a while, the size of it, and then he reached over and took her hand the same way he had in February on the porch, with the same steadiness, and she turned her hand and held his, and they watched the valley go dark together. "We will do it carefully," he said. "We do most things carefully," she said. "Then we will be all right," he said. "We will," she agreed. Wallace wrote to his father in Lexington immediately, and his father wrote back a letter so full of feeling that Wallace read it twice in the kitchen and then put it in the box where he kept important papers, which was in itself a kind of answer to those who wondered what kind of man he was. Evelyn wrote to her parents and received back a letter from her mother that contained detailed and practical advice about what to expect and what to eat and what not to do, delivered with the brisk competence of a woman who had raised one child and helped with several others, and Evelyn read it and found it useful and kept it. Dora Hensley, when she found out, immediately reduced Evelyn's consulting days to 2 and forbade her to lift anything heavier than a pot, which Evelyn ignored on the grounds that she was healthy and not fragile, but she accepted the reduced days with good grace because, by the 5th month, she was tired in a deep-bone way that she had not anticipated, and which the reduced schedule helped. The winter of 1875 was long and cold but warm inside the house on the rise, with the fireplace working steadily and the pantry well stocked, and the chickens providing eggs even in the cold months, because Evelyn had read somewhere that chickens in a well-maintained coop would keep laying, and she had maintained the coop accordingly. She sat on the porch even in winter sometimes, bundled in her coat, and Wallace would come out and sit beside her with a blanket they had started keeping by the door for the purpose, and he would tuck it around them both if the cold was serious, and they would watch the winter stars that were sharper and brighter in the cold air than in summer. "Tell me something about Kentucky," she said one evening. He told her about the horses in Kentucky, the great rolling bluegrass fields and the farms that had been there for generations, and the particular smell of the state in spring, when everything was green so comprehensively that the air itself was green. He told her about the Kentucky Derby, which had not yet started in 1875, but whose forerunner, the racing traditions of Lexington, he described with the loving specificity of a man for whom horses and home were the same thing. He told her about his mother, who had a garden she tended with the same serious attention that Evelyn gave to everything, and who had died in the last year of the war of a fever that had nothing to do with the war but which the exhaustion of those years had made her vulnerable to, and he missed her in a way that had not diminished with time so much as settled into a permanent place in his architecture. "I would like to see Kentucky someday," Evelyn said. "We will go," he said, "when the children are old enough to appreciate the horses." Children, plural, spoken with the easy confidence of a man who was planning a future rather than hoping for one. She felt the word settle into her like warmth. Their son was born on the 14th of March, 1876, on a clear cold morning that smelled of cedar and last night's fire. He arrived into the world with the healthy outrage of a person who had been perfectly comfortable where he was and saw no pressing reason to change locations, and he announced this opinion at full volume for the first several minutes of his existence. The midwife, a woman named Mrs. Cara Fontaine, who had delivered half the babies in the county, said he had good lungs and a firm opinion of himself, and that his mother had handled the whole business with a composure that was almost unsettling. Evelyn, who had not been composed on the inside, was grateful that it had at least appeared that way on the outside. 4 years of moving through difficult situations apparently had its uses. They named him James Thomas Walker, James for Wallace's father and Thomas for his brother in San Francisco, who would receive the letter announcing his nephew's existence with a considerable amount of emotion that he would not admit to in his reply, but which was visible between every carefully controlled line of it. James Walker was from the beginning a substantial presence in the house on the rise. He had his mother's auburn coloring and his father's steady gray eyes, and the determined quality of both of them compounded in ways that suggested he would have opinions about everything as soon as he had the words for them. He was good-natured and curious, and he slept, mercifully, with the deep commitment of a creature who found sleeping one of the more worthwhile activities available. Evelyn, who had been afraid of what motherhood might do to her sense of herself, found instead that it added to it. She was still the woman who had ridden across the territory alone, who had kept a hotel kitchen running with precision and dealt with difficult men without flinching. She was additionally a mother, and the two things sat together without displacing each other, integrated the way good architecture integrates additions. It looked like it had always been there. She returned to the porch in the evenings once James could sleep reliably, and she returned to her chair, and sometimes James slept in her arms in the chair while the valley went quiet below, and sometimes Wallace held him while she sat in the evening peace, and the porch that had once held one chair and then two held all three of them in the soft summer evenings of 1876, with a completeness that neither of them attempted to put into words because the words would have been inadequate to the fact. Wallace's father came to visit in the autumn of 1876, making the journey from Lexington with the determination of a man in his 60s, who had decided that he was going to meet his grandson if it required him to cross half the country, which it did. He arrived thin from the journey and red from the Texas sun, and he sat in the kitchen and held James, and looked at Evelyn with a directness that she recognized as the family trait made origin, the source of the same direct look in his son. "My boy wrote me about you for months before he admitted what he was actually writing about," he said. "He is a careful man," she said. "He is the most careful man I have ever known," James Walker Sr. said. "And the best, I want you to know that." "I know it," she said. "Good," he said. He looked at the house around him, at the solidity of it, at the kitchen she had made excellent and the garden visible through the window and the porch with its 2 chairs. "He built this himself," he said. "I know that too," she said. "He does not do anything carelessly," the old man said. "Not this house, not those horses, and not you." He looked down at the baby in his arms. "And not this one." She had felt in that moment the full and completed circle of something, the sense of having arrived not at an ending but at the heart of a life, the center of it, from which the rest would radiate outward in all the good directions. James Walker Sr. stayed for 3 weeks and was deeply reluctant to leave. On his last evening, Wallace drove him to the stage station in town, and Evelyn sat on the porch while James slept in the house, and she looked at the valley and thought about all the directions she had moved through to arrive at this particular place. And she thought that Clara Reyes had been right in the way that people are right when they have seen a great deal and distilled it to its essence. Some places want you. You have to be moving to find them, but once you find them, moving on would be a kind of foolishness that even the most restless person can recognize. She heard Wallace's wagon coming up the road from town in the dark, the familiar sound of Coleman's steady hooves on the path, and she pulled the blanket from by the door and settled it around herself in the cedar chair and watched the lantern on the wagon swing through the darkness below like a small, reliable star. He drove the wagon into the barn and came up to the porch and sat in his chair, and she passed one end of the blanket over and he tucked it around himself, and they sat together in the October dark, warm enough, looking at the lights of Harlan Creek below. "He cried at the stage," Wallace said. "Of course he did," she said. "He did not want me to see. He turned away." "You saw." "I always see," he said. She leaned her head briefly onto his shoulder, a gesture she had added to her vocabulary of the two of them sometime in the spring, a new language that she was still learning, but that came more naturally with each word. He pressed his cheek briefly to her hair. "We should invite them to come and stay," she said, "properly, for a longer visit." "I thought the same thing," he said. "And Thomas, he has not come since the wedding." "Write to them both," she said. "Tell them to come in the spring. The country is finest in the spring." "I will," he said. They sat a while longer in the quiet, and then she said, "I would like a bigger garden next year." "All right," he said. "More tomatoes, and I want to try melons." "The Albrechts grow good melons," he said. "I will ask them about the soil conditions. And I want to put a proper floor on the chicken coop." "Also all right," he said. "You are very agreeable," she said. "About specific and reasonable things, yes," he said. She smiled at the valley. "What would you want next year for the property?" He thought about it. "Another horse, I think, a mare for you. Coleman is getting old for the work he does, and you should have something that is yours." She was quiet for a moment. "You are going to give me a horse?" "I thought you would prefer to choose her yourself," he said. "I have a contact in San Marcos who sometimes has good animals. We could go together in the spring." She turned to look at him, and he was looking at the valley in the way he did when he was giving her time to have a feeling, which was something she had noticed he did, and which she appreciated more than she could easily express. "Wallace," she said. "Yes," he said, still looking at the valley. "I love you," she said. Not for the first time. They had said it many times since February of 1875, but in this particular moment, in this chair on this porch, with the baby sleeping inside, and the old man on a stage east and the valley below, and the winter coming and the spring after it already being planned. In this particular moment, the words had a weight and a specificity that was different from before. He turned and looked at her. His gray eyes in the lantern light were that color they were sometimes, darker than usual, the weather color, and she thought, as she often thought, that she would never entirely finish learning his face, which was a good thing to still be doing after a year of marriage. "I love you," he said. "I have been building toward that love since before I had the right to, and I intend to go on building it for as long as you will let me." "That," she said, "will be a very long time." The years that followed were full and good and carried the particular weight of things that are genuinely lived in rather than merely endured. James Walker grew from a determined baby into a determined small boy who followed his father around the horse operation with a focused attention that made Wallace's chest feel perpetually full, and who followed his mother around the kitchen and the garden asking questions about everything, until she had to occasionally put him outside simply to finish a thought, which she did without real impatience because she recognized the questions as her own temperament made early. Spring and Thomas Walker came west together in 1877, Thomas arriving from San Francisco on the stage with the look of a man who had been in offices too long and needed sky, and he stood on the porch the first evening and looked at the view with his hands in his pockets and said quietly, "I understand why you stayed," and Wallace had nodded. Thomas got on with Evelyn immediately, and with a frankness that she appreciated. He was a different sort of man than his brother, more talkative, quicker to laugh, but with the same underlying honesty, the same willingness to say what he meant without performance. He stayed for 2 weeks and spent much of it playing with James and helping Wallace with a fence repair on the north pasture and sitting on the porch in the evenings talking with both of them. On his last night he said to Evelyn, "I want you to know that in all the years I have known my brother, I have never seen him like this. Actually content. He was not before," she said. "He was managing," Thomas said. "He managed very well, but it is different from what he is now." He looked at his brother, who was washing supper dishes with James, attempting to help in the way that is less help than presence, but which Wallace was receiving with total patience. "That is what you did," Thomas said. "He built me a chair," she said. Thomas looked at her sideways. "Before I ever came up here," she said. "He built a chair on this porch with me in mind and did not tell me, just built it and waited." Thomas was quiet for a moment. "That is the most Wallace thing I have ever heard," he said. "I know," she said. "Do you know what it means?" Thomas said. "I am beginning to understand it fully," she said. "It means he is a man who loves in preparation rather than in reaction. He sees what someone needs and makes it, and then he waits to see if they will find their way to it." "Yes," Thomas said. "That is," she said, "the most extraordinary thing anyone has ever done for me." "Including the marrying," Thomas said. "The marrying followed from the chair," she said. After the Albrecht family's eldest daughter married the Boyd's second son in 1878, which was the kind of resolved peace the water rights dispute had ultimately made possible, Harlan Creek held a proper celebration in the street outside the church that lasted until midnight and involved Pete Morrow's fiddle and 3 other musicians who had been found from various surrounding ranches. And the dancing went on in the summer dark, with lanterns strung between the buildings and the creek, audible below the town in the warm night. Wallace and Evelyn danced every slow dance and some of the fast ones, and at midnight they walked home up the rise with James asleep on his father's shoulder, his small face still flushed from the excitement of the evening, and Evelyn carried the lantern and lit the path, and at the top of the rise she looked back at the lights of Harlan Creek below, the string of lanterns still visible from here, and thought about the day she had ridden into this valley 4 years ago on a borrowed horse and stood in the creek and pressed her wrists into the cold water. She had not known yet. She had not known about the man on the hill, or the chair he would build, or the life that was waiting on the rise above the town in the patient, preparatory way of all the best things, already made, already placed, waiting only for her to find her way to it. Wallace put James into his bed in the room they had built as an addition onto the east side of the house when James was 2, a proper child's room with a window that faced the morning sun, and he came back to the porch and found Evelyn in her chair looking at the valley. He sat in his own chair and said nothing for a while. Then he said, "James told me today that he wants a horse of his own." "He is 5, she said. "He is very determined for 5. He is very determined in general," she said. "He gets it from both sides." "Perhaps a small one," Wallace said, "when he is 6. "We will discuss it when he is 6, she said. A comfortable quiet settled between them, the August night warm and full of insects and the smell of the cedar hills. She reached over and rested her hand on his arm, the simple, familiar gesture of 2 people who had stopped needing to announce their connection because it was as evident and constant as the valley below them. "I have been thinking," she said. "About what?" "About the chair," she said. He turned to look at her. "I think about it sometimes," she said. "That you built it before you knew me. That you sat here that first winter with the 2 chairs on the porch and never told me." "I told you eventually," he said. "When I asked," she said. "You would never have told me unprompted." "Probably not," he said. "Why not?" she said. She was not asking with any edge in it, not now, not after everything. She was asking because she wanted the full picture, wanted to understand the thing completely. He thought about it with the care he gave to things he intended to mean. Because the chair was not a declaration, he said at last. It was a hope, an intention. Declarations can be refused, but a hope is a private thing until it has somewhere to go. I did not want to put something into words that might burden you, that might make you feel you owed me something you had not yet decided to give. So I built it and I waited. She looked at him for a long time in the August night. And if I had never come up the rise, then I would have had 2 chairs, he said, and one of them would have been very good firewood eventually. She laughed, which was what he had been aiming for, and then she said, I am glad I came up the rise. So am I, he said. Every single day. In the spring of 1879, Evelyn gave birth to their second child, a daughter they named Margaret Clara Walker, the Clara for the woman in El Paso who had pressed a gold piece into Evelyn's hand and told her to go somewhere that wanted her. Evelyn had written to Clara Reyes the previous year, having tracked down through a network of friendly correspondence that Clara was still in El Paso and well, and had told her everything. And Clara Reyes had written back a letter in a sharp, confident hand that said she had always known Evelyn Sullivan would find her people, and she was glad it had turned out to be such a fine example of the species. Margaret Clara Walker arrived into the world with her eyes open, which the midwife said was unusual, and which Evelyn said sounded about right, and she had from the beginning the quality of someone taking stock, which combined with her brother's determined questioning to make the house on the rise a place of considerable conversation at all hours. James received his small horse when he was 6, a stocky bay mare named Cricket, who was exactly suited to a boy who was serious about learning, and who needed a horse that would be patient with the seriousness. He learned to ride under his father's instruction and his mother's calm oversight, which meant he learned correctly and also understood that sloppy habits were not acceptable. And by the time he was 8, he was helping Wallace in the horse operation in real ways that were not merely symbolic. Harlan Creek grew in the late 1870s in the modest but meaningful way of frontier towns that have found their footing. The hotel added a second story. Hector Vasquez expanded his general goods into a proper dry goods store. A doctor arrived in 1878, a young man named Dr. Ellis Marsh, fresh from his training in St. Louis, who set up a practice in a converted room at the end of Main Street, and who was entirely overwhelmed by the reality of frontier medicine, but who was also genuinely good at his work, and adapted with the speed that the territory required. Wallace sold horses to the cavalry at Fort Braedon through the early 1880s and built his operation from 40 acres to 80 when the neighboring property came available in 1880, and the additional acreage allowed him to keep more mares and increase his production in ways that moved the operation from small and stable to genuinely prosperous. He and Evelyn discussed every expansion before it happened, and every significant decision was made together, which was not the way most men conducted their business affairs in 1880 Texas, and which Wallace did not care 1 degree about, because the business worked and the partnership worked, and he had long since stopped consulting other men's approaches to his own life. Evelyn kept her 3 days a week at Dora's hotel kitchen until Dora retired in 1881. And sold the hotel to a young couple from San Antonio named the Harveys, who were capable and energetic and did not need Evelyn's consulting services, but who took the transition seriously enough that she spent 2 months working with the new cook to make sure the standards were maintained, which they were. And then she stepped back from that work entirely and focused on the house and the growing enterprise of the kitchen garden, which by 1882 was supplying not just the household but the hotel and 2 other families in town who paid her a reasonable amount for fresh produce. The garden was the size of a small farm by then, with raised beds Wallace had built to her specifications, and a cold storage cellar he had dug the previous fall, and it was running with the same systematic precision that she brought to everything, with records of what had been planted, and when and how it had produced, and what to do differently next year, all written in the sharp, clear handwriting her father had taught her in Georgia in a schoolroom with a map of the world on one wall. She had finally gone to see Georgia. They had gone in the summer of 1883, all four of them, on the longest journey Evelyn had taken since arriving in Texas, back east on the railroad to Atlanta, and then south to the small town outside of Athens where her parents still lived, her father still teaching and her mother's hat shop still operating with the same incredible optimism of color. Her mother had held Margaret Clara for 20 minutes without putting her down and had cried only a little, and had taken Evelyn's face in her hands and looked at her for a long, thorough moment and said, "You are well. You are truly well. I have been waiting to see that for a very long time." Her father had taken Wallace into his study, and they had been in there for 3 hours, and when they came out, they had the comfortable ease of men who have recognized in each other a fundamental alignment of values, and Wallace had shaken her father's hand and her father had gripped his arm and said, "Good," which contained an entire conversation. James and Margaret Clara had discovered their grandparents' house with the investigative thoroughness of children who have been raised in a household where everything is done carefully, and who have therefore learned how to pay attention. They had explored the hat shop with its extraordinary colors and the schoolroom with its world map, and they had eaten their grandmother's cooking and pronounced it excellent, which made Evelyn's mother look slightly startled and then pleased. On the last evening, sitting with her parents in the garden behind the house, her father said, "Tell me about Texas. Tell me what it actually looks like." She described it to him the way she would have described a person she loved, with the particular accuracy of someone who has studied the subject long enough to see past the obvious to the specific. The hill country with its cedar and live oak, the extraordinary skies that were larger than seemed reasonable, the valley below Harlan Creek and the creek itself, cold even in summer, the view from the rise above town at sunset when the whole landscape went from gold to copper to the deep blue of evening. "I can see why you stayed," her father said. "It took me a while to understand that I could," she said. "But you understand it now." "Completely," she said. They came back to Harlan Creek in August 1883 with gifts from her mother for the house and a box of books from her father for James, who had reached the age where his reading was serious and ambitious, and a small hat her mother had made for Margaret Clara that the girl wore for the entirety of the journey home and for 2 weeks afterward, taking it off only to sleep. Wallace watched Evelyn come back to their house on the rise with the particular attention he gave her even after 9 years, which was the attention of someone who has not got over being grateful for the presence of a thing. She walked into the kitchen and looked around it and touched the smooth wood of the table he had made the previous winter to replace the old one, and she breathed the smell of the house that was cedar and clean cotton and the faint wood smoke of the fireplace, and he saw on her face the thing he had been watching for since the first time she had sat in the cedar chair and taken that breath. It was the look of someone arriving, not visiting, not sheltering, not resting before the next movement. Arriving. The full and complete weight of herself placed down in a place that was hers. "Home," she said quietly, not to him exactly, more to the room, to the fact. "Yes," he said. She turned and looked at him across the kitchen. 9 years of marriage and he was still the man who had built a chair without telling her, who had loved in preparation rather than in reaction, who had offered her a view before he offered her himself and let her decide about both at her own pace. "Do you know what I think about sometimes?" she said. "Tell me," he said. "I think about that first evening," she said, "when I came up the rise and saw the 2 chairs on the porch. Before I knew you had built the second one for me, I stood there looking at them and I felt something that I could not name then. I know what it was now." "What was it?" he said. "It was the first moment in 4 years that I thought the future might be something other than a direction," she said. "That it might be a place, somewhere you go to rather than through." He crossed the kitchen to her, which he had crossed 1,000 times in 9 years, and which he still did with the same deliberate, unhurried pace that had been the first thing she had noticed about the way he moved, as though rushing were mostly a waste of effort. He took her face in his hands and looked at her with the full, open look of a man who has nothing to hide and nothing to manage, only something to feel. "I am glad you came up the rise," he said. "You have said that before," she said. "I intend to keep saying it," he said, "every day for the rest of my life on whatever occasion fits." She put her hands over his hands at her face, the gesture she had been making for years, the one that was not just receiving but returning, choosing back. "Wallace," she said. "Yes," he said. "The view is still the best thing about the porch," she said. "Is it?" he said. "Almost," she said, and the smile she gave him was the one worth waiting for, that Hector Vasquez had described in passing years ago with more precision than he knew. And it had been worth waiting for then, and it was worth it now. And it would be worth it every time it came for every year they had left, which was many, which was all of them, which was exactly as it should be. That evening they sat on the porch as the sun went down over the valley, the two chairs that had stood through 9 years of seasons, the cedar and the oak side by side, worn by the comfortable use of two people who had made a habit of evenings together. James came out and sat on the porch steps reading his new books from his grandfather, and Margaret Clara came and settled against her mother's knee with the authority of a small person who has decided where she belongs. And the valley below caught the last of the light and held it briefly, the way beautiful things do, before releasing it into the evening. The creek caught the light too, that thread of silver through the grass that had been the first thing Evelyn Sullivan had noticed when she had come over the ridge above Harlan Creek on a borrowed horse in the summer of 1874, and thought, just for a moment, that maybe places could want you. It had been right. This place had wanted her. This man had wanted her, in the patient, preparatory way of a man who had built a chair before she arrived and kept it there in the faith that she would come. She had come. She had sat down. She had stayed. The chair was still there, shaped by her and warm from the sun, as solid and particular and hers as everything else on this rise, this land, this life she had moved through 4 years of wilderness to find. The stars came out over the hill country one by one in the way they always did, slow at first and then all at once. And the family on the porch sat in the particular piece of people who have built something real together and know its value. And the night came down over Harlan Creek, Texas, in the year 1883, full and quiet and good, and everything was as it should be.